Some enigmas never let go. They sink their claws deep into a town and refuse to release their grip. In rural Missouri, along a stretch of highway where wheat fields meet endless sky, one question troubled residents for 7 long years. What happened to Officer Ashley Mitchell? On September 14, 1991, this respected traffic officer simply disappeared without a trace. Her last radio call came at 3:47 in the afternoon. 7 years later, what searchers discovered would turn their blood cold. This isn't just another disappearance case. This is a story about truths buried in small-town America, about the thin line between civilization and wilderness, and about a finding so disturbing it would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. Before we dive into this chilling mystery, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more disappeared stories. Ashley Mitchell wasn't just another face behind a badge. At 32, she had spent 8 years patrolling the lonely highways of Benton County, Missouri. Locals knew her chrome patrol motorcycle by its distinctive rumble, and they knew Ashley by her genuine smile and composed manner. She stood 5'6" with dark brown hair, always pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform pressed to perfection. Ashley had a reputation for stopping to assist stranded motorists, often spending her own money on gas for families who couldn't afford to fill their tanks. She kept jumper cables, a toolbox, and emergency supplies in her bike's storage compartments. In 8 years of service, Ashley had never missed a shift, never filed a complaint, and never raised her voice during an arrest. Her supervisor called her the most reliable officer he'd ever worked with. Saturday morning, September 14, 1991, dawned clear and bright across Benton County. The temperature sat at a comfortable 70 latitudic, with light winds from the southwest. Ashley arrived at the station at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes early as always. She performed her routine equipment check, testing her radio, inspecting her motorcycle tires and engine, and reviewing the overnight incident reports. The desk sergeant remembered her stopping by his desk to chat about her weekend plans. She intended to visit her parents in Springfield after her shift ended. At 7:30 a.m., Ashley made her first radio contact with dispatch, reporting clear weather conditions and normal traffic flow along her assigned route. Her voice sounded relaxed and professional. Nothing in her tone suggested any worry or unusual circumstances. The dispatcher on duty later said it was just another routine Saturday morning conversation. Highway 287 stretched like a ribbon through Missouri's heartland, connecting small farming communities across 60 miles of rolling countryside. Ashley's patrol route took her past golden wheat fields, scattered cattle ranches, and farmhouses set back from the road behind groves of oak and maple trees. The highway saw moderate traffic on weekends, families driving to visit relatives, farmers hauling equipment, and the occasional tourists exploring rural America. Ashley knew every mile marker, every dirt road intersection, and every building along her route. She made regular stops at Miller's gas station for coffee and at Riverside Diner for lunch. The area was prone to mechanical breakdowns during hot summer months, and Ashley had helped countless stranded motorists over the years. Most of her route consisted of long, straight stretches with good visibility, making it relatively safe for both patrol work and civilian travel. At exactly 3:47 p.m., Ashley's voice crackled over the radio for the last time. She reported code 7 meal break to dispatch, indicating her location as mile marker 143 near the old Riverside Bridge. This put her approximately 30 miles northeast of the county seat, in an area where farms gave way to more rugged terrain. The dispatcher acknowledged her transmission and logged the time in the daily report. Ashley's voice sounded normal, perhaps slightly tired after 8 hours of patrol duty, but showing no signs of distress or worry. She was expected to resume patrol at 4:30 p.m. and check in with dispatch within the hour. The radio fell silent. Later, Investigators would analyze that last transmission dozens of times, searching for any hint of what was about to unfold. They found nothing. Ashley's last words were routine, professional, unremarkable, and last. By 4:45 p.m., dispatcher Linda Rodriguez noticed Ashley hadn't resumed patrol. Following standard protocol, she attempted radio contact. Static filled the airwaves. At 5:15 p.m., Rodriguez tried again, her voice carrying a note of worry as she called Ashley's badge number. Still no response. The radio silence stretched uncomfortably as other units on patrol began listening for their missing colleague. At 5:30 p.m., Sergeant Tom Bradley attempted to reach Ashley directly. When his calls went unanswered, Bradley initiated search protocols. The clock on the station wall read 6:00 p.m. when the first search units rolled out of the parking lot, their red and blue lights cutting through the approaching dusk. None of them knew they were beginning a search that would consume the town for 7 years. The silence that began that September evening would become the most haunting sound Benton County had ever known. 3 patrol units raced toward mile marker 143 as the sun dipped below the horizon. Sergeant Bradley coordinated the search from his cruiser, directing officers to spread out along Ashley's known route. They found her last known location near Riverside Bridge, but the area revealed no clues. No skid marks on the asphalt, no broken glass, no signs of an incident or struggle. Ashley's motorcycle and her distinctive blue uniform were nowhere to be seen. As darkness fell, local volunteers began arriving with flashlights and lanterns. Farmers abandoned their evening chores to join the search. Wives packed sandwiches and thermoses of coffee. Children were sent to stay with neighbors as adults organized into search teams. They combed ditches, checked abandoned buildings, and called Ashley's name into the growing darkness. The rural town that had adopted Ashley as one of their own rallied to find her. But as midnight approached, the searchers had found nothing. Dawn on September 15th brought reinforcements from across 3 counties. State police helicopters swept the countryside in grid patterns, while ground teams followed every dirt road and farm track. Sheriff's deputies from neighboring counties arrived with tracking dogs and specialized search equipment. The command post established in the parking lot of Miller's gas station buzzed with activity as search coordinators plotted areas covered and assignments for volunteer teams. Local news crews set up cameras as the story of the missing traffic officer spread across Missouri. By noon, more than 200 people were involved in the search effort. Helicopters flew low over the terrain, their rotors beating a steady rhythm that could be heard for miles. Dogs picked up Ashley's scent near the bridge, but lost it after a few hundred yards. Despite the massive effort, the countryside seemed to have swallowed Ashley without leaving a single trace. The investigation began piecing together Ashley's last day through witness statements. At 2:30 p.m., gas station attendant Mary Chin remembered Ashley stopping for her usual black coffee and chocolate donut. They had chatted briefly about the unusually mild weather and Ashley's plans to drive to Springfield after work. Mary recalled Ashley seeming relaxed and in good spirits, perhaps looking forward to her weekend off. A trucker named Bill Santos later told investigators he saw a patrol motorcycle near Riverside Bridge around 3:45 p.m. The timing matched Ashley's last radio transmission, but Santos couldn't provide additional details about what he'd observed. These fragments created a timeline that raised more questions than answers. Ashley had been following her normal routine, making regular stops, showing no signs of distress. Yet, somewhere between 3:47 p.m. and her expected 4:30 p.m. check-in, she had disappeared completely. The 43-minute gap became the focus of intense investigation. The town of Cedar Falls, population 3,400, had never experienced anything like Ashley's vanishing. Churches organized prayer vigils, where town members held candles and shared memories of the missing officer. The Methodist Church on Main Street became an unofficial headquarters for volunteers, serving meals to search teams and coordinating supply donations. Local businesses contributed money, equipment, and manpower to the search effort. The hardware store donated flashlights and batteries. The diner provided free meals to law enforcement officers. Citizens established a reward fund that quickly grew to $25,000 as donations poured in from across the state. Ashley wasn't just a police officer to these people. She was their neighbor, their friend, the woman who had helped them through emergencies and celebrated their triumphs. The town held on to hope that she would be found alive and safe. Within days of Ashley's vanishing, the sheriff's department received dozens of tips from across Missouri and neighboring states. A woman matching Ashley's description was reportedly seen at a truck stop in Kansas City. Another caller claimed to have spotted her patrol motorcycle at a rest area near St. Louis. Each lead required investigation, pulling resources away from the primary search area. Psychics offered their services, claiming they could see Ashley in various locations through supernatural means. Well-meaning citizens reported suspicious activities they'd observed weeks or months earlier, wondering if these incidents might be related to Ashley's vanishing. Detective work became a process of elimination as investigators chased down false leads while maintaining hope that one might reveal Ashley's whereabouts. The telephone at the sheriff's department rang constantly with tips that led nowhere, creating a frustrating cycle of raised hopes and dashed expectations. As days turned to weeks, investigators developed several theories about Ashley's fate. The most likely scenario involved mechanical failure. Perhaps her motorcycle had broken down in a remote area where she'd sought assist on foot and become lost or injured. A second theory suggested Ashley had suffered a medical emergency while alone on patrol, possibly losing consciousness and crashing in an area that hadn't been thoroughly searched. More troubling was the possibility of foul play. Ashley's position as a law enforcement officer meant she had arrested people who might harbor grudges. Had someone she'd ticketed or detained decided to seek revenge? The fourth theory, whispered but not officially discussed, suggested Ashley might have chosen to disappear voluntarily, perhaps due to personal problems unknown to her colleagues and family. Each theory had supporting evidence, but none could account for all the facts surrounding her vanishing. Robert and Margaret Mitchell had been married for 42 years when their daughter disappeared. Both retired teachers. They had raised Ashley and her younger sister Jennifer in the same house where they still lived on Elm Street. Margaret kept Ashley's childhood bedroom exactly as she'd left it on her last visit. The quilt their grandmother had made still folded at the foot of the bed, family photos arranged on the dresser. Robert joined every search party, hiking through rough terrain despite his 68 years and arthritic knees. He carried a photograph of Ashley in his wallet and showed it to everyone he met, hoping someone might remember seeing her. Jennifer drove down from Kansas City every weekend to assist with the search and support her parents. The family struggled with the uncertainty. Not knowing whether Ashley was alive or dead, hurt or safe, made grieving impossible, while hope remained agonizingly alive. The vast search area presented the primary challenge to investigators. Ashley's patrol route covered 60 meters of rural terrain, much of it undeveloped farmland and woodland. With limited resources, the Benton County Sheriff's Department couldn't thoroughly search every square mile. Weather became another obstacle as autumn rains turned dirt roads into muddy quagmires and winter snow-covered potential evidence. The FBI was consulted, but found no evidence of federal crimes that would justify their involvement. Budget constraints meant the department couldn't maintain a full-time search indefinitely. Detectives were pulled back to handle active cases, while Ashley's vanishing was relegated to follow-up status. Local politics complicated matters as city officials worried about the cost of the search and its impact on the county's image. The investigation that had begun with such urgency gradually slowed as practical realities set in. Snow began falling in November 1991, covering the countryside in a white blanket that would hide evidence for months. Search efforts scaled back to occasional weekend expeditions when weather permitted and volunteers were available. Media attention shifted to other stories as Ashley's case grew cold. The sheriff's department retired badge number 247 from active service as a mark of respect, but practical considerations forced them to hire a replacement officer. The town held a memorial service at the Methodist Church on the first anniversary of Ashley's vanishing, though no body had been found, and hope persisted that she might still be alive. Margaret Mitchell attended the service, clutching Ashley's favorite coffee mug, while Robert stood stoically beside her, his eyes fixed on the stained glass windows above the altar. The service ended with the congregation singing Ashley's favorite hymn, Amazing Grace, their voices carrying across the snowy cemetery next to the church. Detective Mike Torres transferred to Benton County in spring 1993, bringing 15 years of experience with the Kansas City Police Department. Torres had specifically requested assignment to the cold case unit, motivated by personal experience with unsolved crimes. His own brother had been murdered in 1987, and the case remained open. Torres approached Ashley's vanishing with fresh eyes, reviewing every report, evidence photo, and witness statement. He discovered small inconsistencies in some witness accounts and noticed that certain areas along Ashley's route hadn't been thoroughly searched. Torres also found references to 2 other missing persons cases in the region, disappearances that had been investigated separately but shared troubling similarities with Ashley's case. He began to wonder if these cases might be connected, perhaps indicating a pattern of criminal activity in the rural area. Torres discovered that rancher Dale Hoffman had disappeared in 1989 while driving alone on Highway 287. 2 years later, traveling salesman Gary Peterson disappeared along the same route. All 3 missing persons, Hoffman, Ashley, and Peterson, had last been seen in the same general area near Riverside Bridge. All 3 had disappeared during daylight hours on weekends when traffic was lighter. All 3 cases involved people traveling alone without witnesses to their last moments. Torres created a map marking the locations where each person was last seen, noting that they formed a rough triangle centered on the Riverside Bridge area. The detective began to suspect that a serial predator might be operating in the region, targeting isolated travelers. This theory would explain why Ashley's patrol training and experience hadn't prevented her vanishing. She might have been dealing with someone who had already successfully committed similar crimes. As Torres investigated connections between the 3 cases, he encountered unexpected resistance from some town members. Several longtime residents seemed reluctant to discuss the disappearances, changing the subject when Torres brought up his theories. Old-timers at the diner would stop talking when he entered, their conversations resuming only after he left. When Torres asked direct questions about the missing persons, some locals mentioned things best left alone and suggested he focus on more recent crimes. The detective sensed that the town was hiding something, perhaps protecting someone or concealing knowledge about the disappearances. Pressure from his superiors to focus on active cases rather than cold cases added to Torres's frustration. Department resources were limited, and the captain questioned whether continuing to investigate 7-year-old disappearances was the best use of detective time. Torres found himself working on Ashley's case during his off-duty hours, driven by instinct that told him answers were within reach. Torres focused his attention on Riverside Bridge, the common element in all 3 disappearances. Built in 1934, the concrete span crossed a deep ravine carved by seasonal flooding. Local records revealed that the bridge had been the site of multiple fatal accidents in the 1940s. 3 separate incidents in which vehicles had crashed through the guardrails and plunged into the ravine below. An elderly resident mentioned that locals had considered the bridge cursed or unlucky for decades, though most dismissed such talk as superstition. Torres wondered if the location's history might be significant, perhaps attracting someone with a morbid fascination with death or accidents. He requested engineering reports on the bridge's construction and maintenance, looking for anything that might explain why 3 people had disappeared in the same area over a 4-year period. The bridge itself appeared structurally sound, but its isolated location made it an ideal spot for someone to intercept travelers without witnesses. During his investigation, Torres heard whispers about the old Mackenzie place, an abandoned ranch property located about 10 miles from Riverside Bridge. The property's owner, Ezra Mackenzie, had died in 1987, and the land had sat empty since then. Local teenagers occasionally used the property for parties, but most adults avoided the area. Several people mentioned that Mackenzie had been a reclusive man who discouraged visitors and posted no trespassing signs throughout his property. Stories circulated about strange activities at the ranch during Mackenzie's last years. Unusual lights seen at night, the sound of machinery running at odd hours, and visitors who came and went without being seen in town. Torres dismissed most of these stories as rural gossip, but the consistent references to the Mackenzie property made him curious. If someone was abducting people in the area, an isolated ranch with no current residents would provide the perfect hiding place. Torres drove out to inspect the Mackenzie property on a cold February morning in 1994. The ranch consisted of 2,000 acres of rough terrain, including wooded hills, ravines, and pastures that hadn't been used for grazing in years. The main house had burned down in 1988, leaving only a stone foundation and a brick chimney standing among the weeds. Several outbuildings remained standing, but were in various states of decay: a barn with a partially collapsed roof, a machine shop with broken windows, and a concrete block building that might have been used for storage. Torres conducted a preliminary search of the accessible buildings, finding only the expected debris of abandonment, rusted tools, rotted lumber, and evidence of animals that had made homes in the structures. Nothing seemed obviously connected to the missing persons cases, but the property's size and isolation made a thorough search impossible without significant resources. Torres made note of the location and planned to return with proper equipment. When Torres requested funding for ground-penetrating radar equipment to search the Mackenzie property, his request was denied due to budget constraints. Legal issues also arose regarding access to private property. Even though the land was abandoned, it still had an owner of record, and proper warrants would be required for any official search. Torres grew frustrated with the bureaucratic obstacles that seemed designed to prevent progress on the case. His colleagues began to question his focus on the cold cases, suggesting that he was becoming obsessed with unsolvable enigmas. The detective found himself investigating during his personal time, using his own resources to follow leads that the department wouldn't fund. His marriage began to suffer as he spent weekends driving rural roads, interviewing elderly residents, and searching for clues in areas that had been searched multiple times before. Torres's wife complained that he talked about Ashley Mitchell more than he talked about their own family. Despite the personal cost, Torres couldn't abandon Ashley's case. He visited the Mitchell family regularly, updating them on his progress and maintaining their hope that answers might still be found. Robert Mitchell's health had declined significantly. The stress of not knowing his daughter's fate had contributed to heart problems and diabetes. Margaret continued to set a place at the dinner table for Ashley, refusing to accept that her daughter might never come home. Torres felt the weight of the family's trust and their desperate need for closure. He promised them that he wouldn't give up the search, even if it meant working on his own time with his own resources. The detective understood that solving Ashley's vanishing had become more than a professional obligation. It was a personal mission that defined his sense of purpose as a law enforcement officer. In 1997, new GPS technology became available to law enforcement agencies, allowing Torres to create detailed maps of previously searched areas and identify locations that might have been overlooked. Computer modeling helped him analyze patrol routes, timing, and geographical features to suggest where Ashley might have gone after her last radio transmission. The technology revealed 3 areas along her route that hadn't been thoroughly searched due to difficult terrain or private property issues. Torres identified these locations as priority sites for renewed search efforts. Convinced that Ashley's motorcycle might be concealed in one of these areas, the systematic approach gave him new hope that technology might succeed where traditional search methods had failed. He began planning a comprehensive search of the 3 locations, determined to either find Ashley or finally eliminate the most promising areas from consideration. Local geology student Kevin Walsh offered to assist Torres with mapping and terrain analysis. Walsh was familiar with the area's drainage patterns, seasonal flooding, and soil composition, knowledge that could be crucial in understanding where evidence might be preserved or destroyed over time. The student pointed out that spring flooding near Riverside Bridge could have carried debris miles downstream, potentially moving Ashley's motorcycle far from the original incident site. Walsh's fresh perspective and technical expertise energized Torres's investigation. Together, they identified areas where seasonal flooding might have deposited objects, focusing their search efforts on locations downstream from Ashley's last known position. The partnership between the experienced detective and the enthusiastic student brought new scientific rigor to the investigation. Walsh's geological survey suggested that certain areas would be more likely to preserve evidence, while others would have been scoured clean by years of flooding. Torres organized a new volunteer search effort for May 1998, focusing on the areas identified through computer modeling and geological analysis. Weather conditions were ideal. Spring rains had ended, but summer heat hadn't yet made outdoor work unbearable. Volunteers arrived with metal detectors, hoping to locate Ashley's motorcycle or other metallic evidence that might have been missed in previous searches. The search teams included experienced outdoorsmen, retired police officers, and Ashley's family members who held on to hope. Torres coordinated the effort with military precision, assigning specific areas to each team and ensuring that all findings were properly documented. As the volunteers spread out across the countryside, tension built among the searchers. After 7 years of disappointment, everyone wondered if this search would finally provide answers or simply add to the frustration of the unsolved case. At 2:15 p.m. on May 23rd, volunteer searcher Jim Caldwell spotted something metallic glinting in afternoon sunlight. The object was partially buried in a ravine, approximately 2.3 meters downstream from Riverside Bridge, concealed beneath years of accumulated debris and vegetation. As Caldwell brushed away mud and weeds, chrome handlebars emerged from the earth. Ashley's patrol motorcycle had been found. Torres arrived within minutes, his heart racing as he looked down at the machine that had carried Ashley on her last patrol. The motorcycle lay on its side, tires sunk deep in dried mud with prairie grass and wildflowers growing through the spokes of the wheels. After 7 years of searching, the physical evidence of Ashley's vanishing finally lay before them. But instead of providing answers, the finding would only deepen the mystery surrounding her fate. The condition of Ashley's motorcycle immediately troubled Torres. The machine appeared to have been carefully placed in the ravine, rather than crashed there during an incident. Chrome parts that should have been damaged by impact were intact, while other components showed signs of deliberate damage. Ashley's helmet was found 15 ft away, cracked, but not shattered in a way consistent with a high-speed crash. Most disturbing was the absence of skid marks or debris at the supposed crash site above the ravine. The motorcycle's position and condition suggested it had been moved to this location after whatever incident had originally separated Ashley from her machine. Torres realized that finding the motorcycle had not solved the mystery. Instead, it had revealed that Ashley's vanishing involved more than a simple incident. Someone had deliberately concealed the evidence, raising terrifying questions about what had happened to Ashley and why her motorcycle had been concealed for 7 years. Ashley's motorcycle was carefully extracted from the ravine and transported to the state crime laboratory for detailed forensic examination. Analysts found that damage patterns on the machine were inconsistent with the type of incident that would have deposited it in the ravine. Paint scrapes and dents suggested the motorcycle had been damaged and then moved, possibly by truck or trailer. More puzzling was the absence of Ashley's blood or DNA on surfaces where it should have been present if she had been injured during a crash. The forensic team also discovered that several expensive components had been removed from the motorcycle, items that a thief might have taken, but which wouldn't have been lost in an incident. These findings supported Torres's theory that the motorcycle had been deliberately placed in the ravine to hide evidence of a crime. The lab analysis raised more questions than it answered, transforming Ashley's vanishing from a possible incident into a probable kidnapping. Inside Ashley's helmet, crime scene technicians discovered a small piece of paper wedged behind the padding. Despite 7 years of exposure to moisture and temperature changes, the paper remained partially legible. In Ashley's handwriting, investigators could make out the words, "If found, check old mine shaft." Azam. The initials matched Ashley's name, confirming that she had written the message. The note suggested that Ashley had survived whatever initial incident had separated her from her motorcycle and had time to leave a hint about her location. But what mine shaft was she referring to? Torres consulted local geological surveys and mining records, discovering that several abandoned mines dotted the area around Riverside Bridge. The message in Ashley's helmet provided the first direct evidence that she had survived beyond her vanishing, but it also raised chilling questions about her last fate. Local mining records revealed an abandoned copper mine located 500 YD from where Ashley's motorcycle was found. The mine had been sealed in the 1960s due to safety concerns, but decades of weathering had compromised the barriers. Torres approached the site with extreme caution, accompanied by mine safety experts and emergency rescue personnel. What they found inside defied all their previous theories about Ashley's vanishing. The mine shaft contained evidence of recent human habitation, camping equipment, water containers, and food supplies that hadn't been there when the mine was sealed. Ashley's police radio lay among the supplies, its batteries long dead. The survival gear suggested that someone had lived in the mine for an extended period, but the identity of that person remained unknown. Had Ashley survived her initial ordeal only to become trapped in the abandoned mine? Or had someone else used the location as a hideout? The mine shaft revealed a story of survival that astonished investigators. Someone had created a makeshift living area in the depths of the abandoned mine, complete with sleeping bags, cooking supplies, and carefully rationed food and water. Ashley's police radio wasn't the only equipment found. Investigators also discovered a flashlight, matches, and medical supplies that suggested the occupant had been treating injuries. The survival setup appeared to have been used for weeks, possibly months, based on the amount of supplies and the wear patterns on the equipment. But the most puzzling aspect was the evidence that the occupant had eventually left the mine voluntarily. Supplies were neatly packed, and personal items were arranged as if someone had intended to return. Torres realized that finding the mine had solved one mystery while creating another. Ashley or someone connected to her case had survived in the mine for an extended period, but their current whereabouts remained unknown. Among the supplies in the mine shaft, investigators found a water-damaged journal that told Ashley's incredible survival story. The entries written in her distinctive handwriting described how she had been injured in a motorcycle incident near Riverside Bridge and had crawled to the mine shaft seeking shelter. Ashley had managed to survive for weeks in the underground hideout, treating her own injuries with supplies from her first aid kit and rationing food she had carried in her motorcycle storage compartments. The journal entries revealed her repeated attempts to signal for assist using her police radio, but the mine's depth and rock walls blocked transmission. Ashley had climbed out of the mine several times to try to reach civilization, but injuries and disorientation had forced her to return to the safety of her underground shelter. The journal provided a day-by-day account of her struggle to survive while hoping for rescue. Ashley's condition had deteriorated over time, according to her journal entries. Untreated injuries, limited food supplies, and the psychological stress of isolation had taken their toll. Her handwriting became increasingly shaky, and her entries shorter and less coherent. The last entry, dated October 7th, 1991, 23 days after her vanishing, mentioned hearing voices and seeing lights near the mine entrance. Ashley's last written words were haunting. "Someone's coming. Finally going home." The journal ended abruptly after that entry, leaving investigators to wonder what had happened during Ashley's last hours in the mine. Had rescuers finally found her, or had her deteriorating mental state caused her to imagine voices that weren't there? The journal's last entry provided no clear answers, only the chilling suggestion that Ashley's ordeal had ended in a way that remained concealed from investigators. Despite finding Ashley's survival site, investigators still had not located her remains. An extensive search of the mine shaft and surrounding area revealed no human bones or other evidence of Ashley's last fate. The investigation expanded to include interviews with local residents who might have been in the area during October 1991. Torres theorized that someone had indeed found Ashley at the mine, either rescuing her or discovering her body, but had failed to report the incident to authorities. The lack of physical remains meant that Ashley's case stayed unresolved, even though her journal had provided insight into her survival efforts. Torres continued to follow leads and interview potential witnesses, hoping to find someone who could explain what had happened to Ashley after her last journal entry. The finding of the mine shaft had answered some questions while raising others, leaving the investigation in a frustrating state of partial resolution. In December 1998, elderly rancher Bill Morrison came forward with information that further complicated the investigation. Morrison claimed that in October 1991, he had found an injured woman on his property, about 5 miles or so from the mine shaft. According to Morrison, the woman matched Ashley's description and was wearing torn police uniform clothing. Morrison said he had driven the woman to County General Hospital 60 miles away, but had never learned her identity or what had happened to her afterward. Hospital records from that period were incomplete, and staff members who had worked there in 1991 could not be located. Morrison's story provided a possible explanation for Ashley's vanishing from the mine shaft, but it also raised new questions about why no official record existed of her treatment. Had Ashley been treated at the hospital under a false name? Was Morrison's memory accurate after 7 years? The rancher's account offered hope that Ashley might have survived her ordeal, but without corroborating evidence, his story remained unverified. Torres's investigation of County General Hospital revealed disturbing gaps in their 1991 medical records. Files from the period when Ashley might have been treated were either missing or contained incomplete information. The hospital administrator claimed that a computer system upgrade in 1995 had resulted in the loss of some older records, but Torres suspected that records might have been deliberately destroyed or concealed. Several former staff members had died or moved away, making it impossible to verify Morrison's account through eyewitness testimony. Torres discovered that the hospital had been owned by a private corporation with connections to local political figures, raising the possibility that Ashley's treatment had been covered up to protect someone's reputation. The hospital's cooperation with the investigation was minimal, and Torres felt that officials were actively obstructing his efforts to learn the truth about Ashley's potential treatment. Even after finding Ashley's motorcycle, survival site, and journal, crucial questions remained unanswered. Why had her motorcycle been moved and concealed in the ravine? Who had Ashley encountered during her last days in the mine shaft? If she had been rescued and treated at the hospital, why was there no record of her care? Why had no one reported finding her alive after the massive search effort? Torres suspected that Ashley's vanishing involved more than a simple incident. Someone in the town knew what had happened to her and was keeping that knowledge secret. The detectives' investigation had revealed a pattern of concealment and obstruction that suggested powerful interests were working to keep Ashley's fate concealed. Local residents continued to avoid discussing the case, and Torres felt that he was fighting against a conspiracy of silence that protected those responsible for Ashley's vanishing. By 1999, Torres had exhausted most of his investigative leads without finding definitive answers about Ashley's ultimate fate. The case remained officially open, but was no longer actively investigated due to resource constraints and the passage of time. Torres retired from the sheriff's department in 2000, troubled by his inability to provide closure for Ashley's family. Robert Mitchell died in 2001 without ever learning what had happened to his daughter. Margaret continued to live in the family home, maintaining Ashley's room and hoping for answers that might never come. The town of Cedar Falls carried the weight of the unsolved mystery, with some residents believing they knew more than they were willing to admit. Ashley's vanishing had become part of local folklore, a cautionary tale about the dangers that could lurk in rural America's isolated places. The case file remained in the sheriff's department archives, waiting for new evidence or witnesses who might finally reveal the truth. The contrast between Ashley's last radio transmission and the finding of her abandoned motorcycle serves as a haunting reminder that some enigmas resist resolution. On one side, we see Officer Ashley Mitchell as she was professional, dedicated, smiling beside her chrome patrol bike on a sunny September afternoon. On the other side, we see what remained after 7 years, rusted metal half buried in weeds, silent testimony to a tragedy that may never be fully understood. Ashley's courage and will to survive had carried her through 23 days in an abandoned mineshaft, but her ultimate fate remains unknown. The investigation revealed evidence of a cover-up, suggesting that someone in the town knew what had happened, but chose to keep that knowledge secret. For the residents of Cedar Falls, Ashley's vanishing left scars that never fully healed, a reminder that even in small towns where everyone knows everyone, terrible truths can remain buried. Some disappearances leave behind more than empty spaces. They leave questions that echo through generations, whispers in the wind that ask, what really happened to Ashley Mitchell? The case of Officer Ashley Mitchell remains one of the most haunting, unsolved enigmas in true crime history. This missing person investigation spanned 7 years of relentless searching, revealing a vanishing mystery that goes far deeper than anyone imagined. Ashley's story reminds us that some people vanish without a trace, leaving behind only questions and the determined efforts of those who refuse to give up. Her case joins the ranks of cold case files that continue to baffle investigators and captivate true crime enthusiasts worldwide. What makes this vanishing so particularly disturbing isn't just that a dedicated traffic officer disappeared, but the systematic cover-up that followed. As we've seen in many real-life enigmas, the truth often lies buried beneath layers of truths and silence. Ashley Mitchell's vanishing serves as a chilling reminder that even in small-town America, the most shocking enigmas can remain unsolved for decades.